In 2024, if you had asked anybody who owns ships for a living what the car shipping business would look like by 2026, you would have gotten the same answer over and over. Down. Way down. The logic was airtight. Shipyards were about to deliver the biggest wave of car carriers ever ordered. The global fleet was going to grow roughly 40%. More ships, same cargo, prices fall. That's not a hot take, that's supply and demand. And every analyst, every board deck, every industry outlook said the same thing. Here's what actually happened. The fleet grew, and prices went up 65% this year. Chartering a big car carrier cost about $42,000 a day at the end of last year. By June, it was $70,000. And the biggest car shipping company on Earth, running its Asian fleet completely full, every deck packed, watched its profit fall 49%. Full ships. Half the money. That's not supposed to be possible. One company saw this coming in 2022 and spent almost $700 million getting ready for it. At the time, the industry thought they'd lost their minds. For about 100 years, the auto industry ran on one unwritten rule. You build cars, somebody else moves them. Ford, GM, Toyota, Volkswagen, Hyundai, every single one of them built vehicles and then handed the ocean part to specialists. Companies with names most Americans have never heard: Wallenius Wilhelmsen, NYK, K-Line, Hug, Grimaldi. They ran one of the most quietly profitable corners in global trade, and their whole business model depended on you never thinking about them. Which is the thing about shipping. It's the only industry that measures success by how completely you ignore it. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of everything in your house crossed an ocean, and you have never once wondered how. You only notice logistics when it breaks. A ship wedges itself in the Suez Canal, and for 6 days everyone on the internet becomes a salvage engineer. Then it clears, and you forget it exists again. And within that invisible world, moving finished cars is the most invisible piece of all. You can't just stuff a car in a shipping container. Well, you can, and we'll come back to that, because it matters more in 2026 than it ever has. But it's expensive. You're paying to ship a lot of empty air, and things get scratched. So the industry built something else. They call it roll-on, roll-off. Row-row. Picture a 15-story parking garage that floats. Flat decks, internal ramps, a door in the back that drops onto the dock. Cars drive on under their own power. No cranes, no containers. Just a line of vehicles and a lot of guys with clipboards. That arrangement held for decades. It was stable. It was profitable. And nobody on either side had any reason to touch it. Which, historically, is exactly when a system is about to get taken apart. The crack in the foundation goes back to 2008. The financial crisis wiped out car sales globally. Shipping companies were sitting on expensive vessels with nothing to carry. Rates collapsed. Orders got canceled. And an entire generation of maritime executives learned a lesson that hardened into religion. Never build a car carrier on speculation. So for more than a decade, almost nobody ordered new ones. Old ships hit retirement and went to the scrapyard. Nothing replaced them. The fleet quietly shrank year after year, and nobody said anything because demand was flat too. Then, two things happened at the exact same moment. COVID ended, and people came out of lockdown with savings and bought cars like the world was ending. And at the same time, China's auto exports went vertical. Look at this curve. 2019, China exported just under 600,000 vehicles, a rounding error. 2023, over 5 million, the year China passed Japan to become the biggest vehicle exporter on the planet. Last year, around 7 million. Now put those two facts next to each other. A shipping fleet that shrank for 15 years, and an export curve that went nearly straight up in 4. What happened next isn't a mystery. It's arithmetic. Before COVID, renting a mid-size car carrier ran about $17,000 a day. In August 2022, Nissan re-upped on a single ship at $100,000 a day. By late 2023, the one-year rate hit $115,000, roughly 9 times more expensive in about 3 years for a service that had barely changed since the 60s. That's $4.5 million to rent one boat for 1 month. And here's a detail people forget. This hit American companies too. In October 2022, Elon Musk told investors Tesla literally could not find enough ships. His words, not enough ships, not enough trains, not enough car transport trucks. Tesla had built tens of thousands more cars than it managed to deliver that quarter. The bottleneck wasn't the factory. It was the ocean. But the money was never the scariest part. The scary part was control. A charter is a contract, and a contract has an owner. If your competitor locks up a vessel for 3 years, that ship is gone. Doesn't matter what you offer. Your factory can be running perfectly, your order book can be full, and your cars just sit in a lot in the rain getting older and less valuable every week. That's the moment one company figured out something the rest of the industry hadn't. It wasn't really competing with Volkswagen for customers. It was competing with everyone for deck space. In 2022, BYD announced it was going to spend around $687 million building its own fleet of car carriers. The reaction ranged from polite confusion to open laughter. Car makers don't buy ships. That is not a thing car makers do. And BYD had exactly 0 years of experience operating an ocean-going vessel. January 9th, 2024. The first one shows up at Yantai Port. 200 meters long, 13 decks, and the company's name painted on the hull in letters you could read from across the harbor. BYD Explorer Number 1. She loaded up, sailed to Shenzhen, filled her decks, and left China with over 5,000 electric vehicles headed for the Netherlands and Germany. 41 days at sea. That first trip made headlines. What came after is what actually mattered, and it happened absurdly fast. Second ship, December 2024. Third, January 2025, and that one was significant because BYD owned it outright instead of chartering. April 2025, the BYD Shenzhen, 9,200 cars across 16 decks, the largest vehicle carrier that had ever existed. First trip, Brazil. In June, 2 more arrived 4 days apart. July, another. September, number 8. 8 ships in 20 months, starting from nothing. Over 1 million vehicles a year, on hulls they control. So how do you do that? If Ford decided tomorrow it wanted 8 new car carriers, every major shipyard would tell it the same thing. Get in line. We'll see you in the 2030s. BYD skipped the line because the line is in China. Chinese yards now build more than half of all new shipping tonnage on Earth and take around 2/3 of new orders. 16 straight years as the #1 shipbuilding nation. 6 of the world's 10 biggest shipbuilders are Chinese. That's the part almost every American story about Chinese EVs misses. This fleet wasn't a gamble that paid off. It's what happens when the country that spent 20 years becoming the world's shipyard also becomes the world's car exporter. A European automaker trying the same move would be waiting years. BYD was calling a yard down the coast. And the math is brutal in its simplicity. A ship costs a fortune to buy. But compared to paying $100,000 a day to rent one, it's cheap to operate. It's rent versus mortgage. BYD says owning the fleet cuts per vehicle shipping cost by 30 to 40%, savings that could run over $1 billion a year. If this is the kind of thing you want to understand before it shows up in the headlines, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep digging. Stand on the dock and look up at one of these, and there's no romance to it at all. No elegant curve, no graceful bow. It's a slab. A rectangular steel box, 16 stories tall, that happens to float. From the wrong angle, it looks like a Costco parking structure broke loose and drifted out to sea. The ramp drops, and the choreography starts. These ships have doors at the stern, the bow, and often the side, more entry points, faster fill. And then cars get driven aboard, one at a time, by actual human beings. Hundreds of drivers in a non-stop relay. Up the ramp, into position, hop out, walk back down, do it again. Some ports run bicycles or shuttles just to get drivers back to the dock faster. Loading a 9,000-car ship isn't a crane operation. It's hours of continuous human movement, planned to the minute, because every minute that hull sits at the pier, it's burning money. Now here's the feature nobody outside the industry knows about. The decks move. Modern carriers have hoistable decks, hydraulics that raise or lower entire floors to change the ceiling height between levels. One voyage, you drop the ceilings and pack in thousands of hatchbacks. Next voyage, you raise them and carry buses, tractors, construction equipment. It's a building that reconfigures its own floor plan based on what's booked. Quick piece of trivia that lives rent-free in my head. The industry measures capacity in car equivalent units, and the unit is based on the dimensions of one specific vehicle, a 1966 Toyota Corona. Every headline about a ship carrying 9,000 cars is really saying it holds 9,000 of that one old Toyota. Electric vehicles have made all of this harder. They're heavier. Their packs hold stored energy a parked gas car doesn't, which completely changes the fire risk profile. Most operators now cap how charged a battery can be when it rolls aboard. Detection and suppression systems had to be redesigned. And as of January this year, the Classification Society DNV's EV-specific fire safety notation became mandatory for new builds. Think about what that means. The cargo is now dictating how the ships themselves get engineered. BYD's vessels run LNG dual fuel, which isn't a green gesture. It's a calculation that these hulls need to stay legal in European waters for the next 25 years. Okay, back to the thing from the top of the video. By early 2025, the consensus was that BYD had built a monument to a shortage that was about to end. Analysts at Clarksons, Vason, AXS, Serious People, were forecasting oversupply. Rates were expected to fall to 50,000 a day, maybe below. One prediction had them halving. Here in August 2026, the opposite happened. China didn't export 7 million vehicles this year. It's on pace for 10 million. 4 million had already left in the first 5 months alone, up 63% year over year. And this is where it gets counterintuitive, because that surge isn't a sign of strength at home. Chinese domestic car sales fell more than 20% in the first half of this year. That market is now 10 months into a slide. Analyst Toulet describes exports as a pressure release valve for cars the domestic market can't absorb. More than 100 brands are fighting over a shrinking home market, so they're all pushing outward at once. Now, the fleet did grow 40%, so why did rates rise anyway? Distance. And this is the insight I think is genuinely worth taking away from this whole video. Shipping capacity is sold in car-equivalent units, but it's consumed in car-equivalent unit miles. A ship carrying 9,000 cars from Japan to California is a completely different amount of capacity than 9,000 cars from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Chinese cargo sails farther than the Japanese and Korean cargo it's displacing. Add Red Sea disruption pushing Asia-Europe traffic around the Cape of Good Hope, which tax about 25% onto the voyage, and you can grow the fleet 40% and still end up shorter than you started. The results are wild. Specialized carriers are now booked out years in advance. Roughly 2 million cars are expected to move this year in regular shipping containers. The crappy, expensive fallback, double last year's number, because there's simply no ro-ro space to book. Maersk is now selling directly to automakers. Up to 4 million vehicles a year leave China by container or other workarounds. And the operators? Wallenius Wilhelmsen ran its Asian fleet at full utilization in the second quarter and still posted a 49% drop in net profit. Read that again. Highest demand in history, ships completely full, profit cut in half. The scarcity premium isn't landing with the operator. It's landing with whoever owns the hull, which is precisely what BYD bought in 2022, for the price of about one mid-size factory. Meanwhile, BYD's European registrations more than doubled in the first half of this year. In Australia, it passed Tesla as the top electric brand and hit number 2 overall in April, behind only Toyota, ahead of Ford, Hyundai, and Mazda. In June, the BYD Zhengzhou pulled into Melbourne with 4,810 cars, part of a 30,000 vehicle push into a single market. No shipping line involved, no slot to beg for. They just sent a ship. Now you might be thinking, BYD doesn't sell cars here. Tariffs and national security rules on connected car software keep them out. So why does any of this touch you? 2 reasons. The first is the one nobody's watching, and there's a date on the calendar. In April 2025, the U.S. Trade Representative finalized a set of port fees aimed at Chinese shipbuilding dominance. Most of the coverage focused on the fees for Chinese-built and Chinese-operated vessels. But there's a separate piece, Annex 3, that applies to foreign-built vehicle carriers. All of them. $150 per car equivalent unit of capacity. charged at the first U.S. port. It doesn't matter if the ship is Norwegian, Japanese, or Korean. If it wasn't built in America, and essentially none of them are, it pays. Those fees took effect in October 2025, then got suspended for exactly 1 year after the Trump-Xi meeting, alongside China dropping its retaliatory fees on U.S. vessels. That suspension expires November 9, 2026. That's under 3 months from now. If it snaps back, the cost lands on the Japan to U.S., Korea to U.S., and Europe to U.S. routes, the ones that actually bring cars to American dealerships. And the operators on those lanes have no Chinese export boom to offset it with. That cost flows into sticker prices on the exact vehicles Americans buy. The second reason is bigger and doesn't have a date on it. What you're watching is the largest car maker in the world, proving that if you control the pipe, you don't have to negotiate. Every legacy automaker, including Detroit, spent 40 years outsourcing everything that wasn't core. A Rhodium Group report this March put a number on the consequence. The Western assumption that outsourcing is always cheaper doesn't actually hold in practice. Whoever controls how goods move sets the price of everything that moves. Venice knew it. Britain knew it. The auto industry forgot for a century. Now, before this sounds like a victory lap, there's a hole in it, and it's a big one. Every voyage has 2 legs. Only one of them makes money. BYD fills ships in China and sends them to Europe, Brazil, Mexico, Australia. 9,000 cars, decks packed, beautiful. Then the ship has to come home, and Europe does not send 9,000 cars back to China. Neither does Brazil, neither does Australia. In 2025, 3 BYD vessels arrived in Brazil loaded to the roof, racing a tariff deadline. All 3 left empty. An empty ship burns nearly as much fuel as a full one. Same crew, same port dues, same insurance, same canal fees. Every mile home is pure loss. That's not a footnote. It's the entire reason traditional carriers exist. Wallenius, NYK, Höegh survive because they never depend on one customer or one direction. Japanese cars to Europe, European machinery to the Gulf, used vehicles to Africa. Decades of connective tissue keeping decks full both ways. BYD chose speed over that. And it's clearly aware of the problem. It set up a logistics subsidiary whose registered business scope includes freight forwarding, warehousing, container shipping, and stevedoring. That's not a company that plans to run 8 boats for itself. That's a company positioning to sell deck space, potentially to the exact Chinese rivals it's fighting in Europe and South America. Your competitor becomes your landlord, which is a strange business to accidentally invent. 3 things to watch, and I'd put money on all 3 mattering. 1. The order book is loaded. Ordering reignited hard. Over 87,000 CEU of new car carriers ordered in the second quarter alone, up more than 600% year over year. But those deliveries cluster in 2027 and beyond. Vaison's analysts point to late 2027 for rate pressure and 2028 for the real inflection, assuming Suez routing normalizes. If both land at once, the shortage flips to a glut, and everyone who owns steel discovers what fixed costs feel like. 2. BYD's own factories may undercut its ships. Brazil is producing. Hungary, Pakistan, Thailand, Uzbekistan are coming online. Every car built locally is a car that never needs a boat. There's a real possibility the fleet becomes less essential precisely because the expansion worked. 3. BYD already lost the size crown. In April, a Chinese yard delivered a 10,800-car vessel to a Korean operator. SAIC and Geely have their own ships now. Cherries in logistics. This was never one company going rogue. It's an entire national industry deciding it would rather own the boats than book them. So, real question for the comments. Smartest industrial move of the decade, or a bet that just hasn't come due yet? And if you want the follow-up when those port fees either snap back or get extended in November, subscribe, because that story is going to move fast.